Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Greetings, people of Earth and the known universe. You're listening to Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. This is your Captain Keith, and today we're going to talk about The Long Strange Trip, which is a docu-series on the Grateful Dead off of Amazon Prime. We're also going to talk about Love Beats and Rhymes, which is a film that went to Netflix that stars Azelia Banks and is directed by the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan. And the last two episodes of Lucifer, the Fox hit series from season 3. Will there be a season 4? Who knows? So, getting right into it. Long Strange Trip. I had been meaning to watch this for weeks now, and I finally got a chance to this past week. It's a Amazon Prime original docu-series on the Grateful Dead. I thought it was going to be just like one big movie, but it was like 6 episodes. It's pretty cool. It was very informative, very enlightening. There are things about the Grateful Dead that I had no idea about, like the fact that Jerry Garcia originally started off like playing the banjo and doing like bluegrass music and stuff. It was a trip. Of course, the Grateful Dead is originally from like the San Francisco East Bay area of California, and the documentary was just riveting. First and foremost, let it be known. Whether you are a fan of the Grateful Dead or not, it has to be acknowledged that they basically kind of created their own culture within rock and roll, with their fandom, with their fans who are called Deadheads. I had the opportunity to. I never went to a Grateful Dead concert, but let me tell you what happened. So it was the year that Jerry Garcia passed away, or a year after, I believe. And instead of having, they were no longer the Grateful Dead because he was gone, but they had what was called the Further Festival. And a friend of mine who was Deadhead, who basically turned me on to them. I mean, I didn't even know who they were or know about them until my friend named Pat, he turned me on to them. He enlightened me in that regard. Like I would be driving around and I'd see these stickers in the car of this skeleton, with all the different colors on it, the skull. And I'm like, what is that? Oh, that's the Grateful Dead. Then I'd see these teddy bears. I'm like, what's that? Oh, that's the Grateful Dead. So I think it's always cool when like a band has a cool logo, or when any group that's a positive group. I don't mean the negative groups, because there's negative groups with logos too. But any group that's a positive group has like a logo. It reminds me of like DC superheroes, like the Superman logo. Whether you read the comic book or not, if you see that S in that, upside down triangle, that's Superman. If you see a black bat with the yellow background, in a like a ovular circle, it's Batman. If you see the W with the gold W with like the like little fins at the end of it or something, that's Wonder Woman. So yeah, if you see the teddy bears, these colorful little teddy bears dancing, that's the Grateful Dead. If you see like a really cool skull that's like in red, white, and blue, that's the Grateful Dead. So I just got fascinated with that. So getting back to my story. So basically, I believe it was a year after Jerry Garcia died, and my buddy Pat was like, let's go to this show. So it was called the Further Festival, and it was the members of the Grateful Dead, and it was all their bands. Mickey Hart, I believe, had a band called like the Mystery Machine or something like that. I bought one of his albums. It was pretty good. He was one of the drummers from the Grateful Dead. And Bob Weir had a group called Rat Dog, and he performed. So everybody who had a band, everybody from the Grateful Dead who was still alive had their own bands. They all performed at this festival. And it was a cool experience. I go to a lot of concerts when I can. I did a lot, over a decade ago. It was what I did because I didn't go to too many concerts when I was in high school. So I figured I'd make up for lost time when I got out of high school and got out of college. So, it was all about the live shows. This was one of the most unique shows I've ever seen in my life. The Further Festival was cool. I got a chance to see all these Deadheads. I mean, these were Deadheads, just hanging out, having a drum circle, just being happy, just, blissful. And it was just a cool experience to watch that. The drum circle in the parking lot, to go in and see the actual show, and then see all these people dancing on the lawn, and they had like their shotgun microphones and other recording devices, and they were recording the bands. And Pat was like, "Oh yeah, man, that's what, you go to a Dead show, that's what you do. I mean, the band is cool with it." I had never seen that before, where you were allowed to record the group. So you find out when you watch the docuseries Long Strange Trip that there are fans who have like maybe thousands or hundreds or maybe even up to 1,000 cassette tapes of different shows from the Grateful Dead. So where they're doing different songs or the same songs, but it's just done a little bit differently. And some stuff is better than others. So, I mean, you go to a Dead show, bootlegging was allowed. So when I went to the Further Festival, it was the same situation. It was, yeah, and it was just cool to watch people. They were just so mellow. I mean, and then of course I saw like an ambulance truck. I guess they had to have one on standby for legal reasons in case anybody maybe had a bad trip or OD'd or had a drug problem or something. I don't know. But it was an amazing show. I had a good time. It kind of blew me away. I mean, I've never seen fans like that before. Just be so happy and blissful, and then all the people who were just recording the set. It was just that was a trip. I mean, to see a rock band have this special, like, intimate relationship with their audience, with their fans. I mean, it was cool. So when you watch this docuseries or documentaries, I mean, it's both, you find out that Jerry Garcia had always had a fascination with death and Frankenstein. Frankenstein was like his favorite creature. He would draw sketches of Frankenstein. Boris, of course, we're talking about Boris Karloff's version of Frankenstein. I know that's the old school throwback for some people who don't know. Boris Karloff, back in the, like, I guess, the 50s and 60s, there were three cats who were the horror movie actor icons in Hollywood. Bela Lugosi, who was the original Dracula, first of all, in black and white. He definitely had swag and style. Boris Karloff and Vincent Price. But you could also throw in there Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's Dracula was a whole nother trip. So, but I digress. So Jerry Garcia would definitely like draw sketches, really cool sketches too, of Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. And it's interesting because before Boris Karloff took that role as Frankenstein, it was offered to Bela Lugosi, and he thought that Frankenstein just wasn't sexy enough, so he turned it down. And then Bela just thrived with that role. I mean, then Boris thrived with that role, and of course he did other things, but that was probably his most famous role. So, that was kind of like a little spark in Jerry's mind. Jerry met these other guys, and they all had different backgrounds, blues background, jazz background, and his bluegrass background, rock background. And then they met a friend who turned him on to acid. And you find out within the story that apparently, or according to the documentary, the CIA, so allegedly, the CIA had came up with LSD, and they gave it to some of their soldiers as an experiment to see how they would comply with orders. And they found that they wouldn't comply. They were happy and blissful and kind of lazy. So one of the guys who was a soldier, I guess he was able to get a hold of that LSD. And when he met up with the dead, with Jerry and the fellas, they were called the Warlocks at the time. They weren't the Grateful Dead right away. They used to be called the Warlocks. And later on, I found out through my friend Pat that, like in the 90s and in the 80s, when they wanted to do a show where they wanted to be more intimate and not as many people, because ironically, eventually what happened with the Grateful Dead is that their shows became too crowded. They had too many people coming. There were people who were coming, and the show was sold out, so they would have their own party in the parking lot. So when the Grateful Dead wanted to try to minimize that, they would advertise the show as the Warlocks. And if you were in the know, you knew it was them. And then you would show up to that show. So that was interesting. So that was the original name, was the Warlocks. And we'll talk about why they had to change that name shortly. So I was talking about how they, so this guy they knew, he gave them the acid test, apparently, which is the same test they were giving the military soldiers in the army, allegedly. And and when the guys in the band, they got a hold of that, it just changed their perspective all the way. Let me give you the Grateful Dead's lineup, the members, who they all were. So, of course, it's Jerry Garcia. He's the most famous member. He was basically the leader of the Grateful Dead. Bob Weir. There was a guy named Pigpen, but let me get his real name. 1 second here. Let me get all that for you. So let's see. Mickey Hart. So they were formed in 1965 in Palo Alto, California, where Stanford is. Okay, still East Bay area. So they were arranging quintet to septet. They're known for their unique eclectic style, which fuse elements of rock, psychedelia, experimental music, modal jazz, country, folk, bluegrass, blues, gospel, reggae, space rock. And they're known for the live performances, which a lot of times gave you lengthy instrumental jams. And improvisational rock and roll, fused with other elements. So there are times when they would do a show and they would just improvise for a while. So they didn't always want to do like really regimented set list at first. So the founding members were Jerry Garcia, lead guitar and vocals, Bob Weir, rhythm guitar and vocals, Ron Pigpen McKernan, who did keyboards, harmonica, and vocals, Phil Lesh on bass and vocals, and Bill Kreutzmann on drums. So, and it says that members of the Grateful Dead had played together in various San Francisco bands, including Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions, and, like I said, the Warlocks. That was, their previous incantation. So, and Phil Lesh was the last member to join the Warlocks before they became the Grateful Dead. He replaced Dana Morgan Jr., who played bass for a few gigs. Drummer Mickey Hart, and non-performing lyricist Robert Hunter joined in 1967. Yes, and basically, the original drummer, Bill Kreutzmann, basically brought Mickey Hart in. So, and they wound up with two drummers. So that was like a kind of a first in rock and roll in America. So that's the initial lineup of them. What did I leave off with them? Oh, yeah. So, like I said, when they took the acid test, that kind of changed their perspective, and they started to experiment, of course, with their music. And then, they were a part of the hippie movement that was huge in the Haight-Ashbury district. So, they would play in that area all the time, and it was definitely a counter-cultural movement going on. and they didn't leave that area and the hippie movement until it got commercialized in the 60s with films and movies and TV shows and other groups, other manufactured groups that were made. So that became very interesting to see. They moved on, and eventually they they got a record deal with Warner Brothers, and we'll talk about that after this break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
And welcome back. Once again, you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast. This is Captain Keith. And a few things. First and foremost, this docuseries or documentary is directed by Amir Bar-Lev. And I was mistaken. So the gentleman who turned the dead onto LSD was not in the military. So his name is, one second, dropping stuff. His name is Ken Kesey. Kesey. And he is also the author of One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. So he decided to take a bus cross country while tripping on acid, orange juice laced acid or LSD. So basically the story goes that he was a former wrestler and amateur puppeteer who had signed up for research into the effects of LSD. Whereas the LSD advocating psychologist Timothy Leary, whom he visited tripping, gave them a cool reception, and he introduced Kesey to the LSD. But what's interesting, it looks like that maybe Mr. Leary thought that the LSD should be for the elite, and Kesey wanted the drug to be widely available to everyone. So he drove cross country in a bus with his friends, the Merry Pranksters, and they were going to film a movie about their journey and their trip. And that's when they ran into the Grateful Dead, and then the rest is history in that regard. Ken Kesey, Kesey. That was his name, the guy who turned him on. So as I said before, the Dead did eventually wind up getting a record deal with Warner Brothers. And this is how you know it was the 60s, because these guys, they of course they want to put out music, but they just had a lot of fun. They spent a lot of time in the studio jamming and just learning the instruments, because I guess basically they wanted to do this themselves. They wanted to engineer it themselves. And they racked up a lot of money going out, taking trips. At one scene, they decided to go to the zoo instead of record. And then after they're at the zoo, they decided they want to record the zoo animals and record other things like people driving and mix it all together in the studio. So, this was driving the president of Warner Brothers at the time just crazy. I'm trying to find his name because I should have wrote it down and I didn't. It's on me, of course. But as I said before, this is how you know that this was the 60s and that this was a different time period, because giving a rock and roll group that kind of leeway to basically hang out, party, and you don't pressure them about recording the album, but you knew, but you were just counting on and hoping that eventually they were going to give you something that you can use. That type of leeway given to an artist from a major mainstream record label does not really happen anymore to a new group. Not at all. And, the Grateful Dead were basically a new group. I mean, they had a nice following, but, you know, they were untested at the time, at least. So it was just very fascinating to see that type of exchange. And then eventually they decided to record a record, and it was called Working Man's Dead. And the album was successful for them. It did go platinum. And the president of Warner Brothers was very happy with them. He states that he would come to visit him from time to time. At one time, they tried to give him some coffee, and he was like, no, that's okay. Because he knew at times they were lacing it with LSD. They even went to a record label party. And they performed there, and apparently they turned the place out and laced the Kool-Aid with LSD. Yeah, so the Grateful Dead they were no joke, not at all. So what I like about this documentary is just watching how the band interacted with each other, and watching how their following grew. And there was no grand master plan of any of it. The Dead just enjoyed performing and interacting with their audience, and they enjoyed watching their audience perform with them. And when you watch this documentary, you see people in the crowd and you see all this bliss they have. And yes, a lot of them are on drugs, but I don't think they were all on drugs. Some of them were drinking and whatever. And it's a lot of young people. And I guess at the time they were the hippies, but they just seemed to be so happy. And I was tripping out because I'm watching this documentary, and I'm seeing, like, at one scene, there's a scene where Jerry's performing and he's playing guitar, and behind him is this guy standing like on a speaker, and he's naked, just dancing and grooving to the music, and no one says anything. And then as I'm watching this documentary, I see more naked people, not just women, men and women, dancing around naked, some muddy, some not, just having a good time. I mean, they're just really about the music. So I will say this about the Grateful Dead, the exchange they had with their fans. There was definitely a pureness to the love of that music and the love of their performing that music. It's very cool. And then so of course there's unreleased footage that you get to see, and never before seen footage of Jerry and the band that's in this documentary, and it's cool to see. And you get to see how other people get into the band, become a part of the band. And one of the things I enjoyed seeing was Sam Cutler, I believe his name is. He was their road manager from 70 to 74. And you find out that before he became their road manager, he was a manager for the Rolling Stones. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Grateful Dead chose him. They were impressed by him. And he was a guy responsible for getting them to wherever they had to go, and helping them with the business aspect of things, helping them to keep it business oriented. And then, so of course, the Dead wind up having wives and girlfriends and having children, and having everybody on the road with them. So they were, so they were creating this culture that basically spread to their fans, and their fans wound up doing the same type of thing, traveling from town to town in buses, vans, and cars to see them perform and just enjoy the show. And the fans were so ecstatic because they knew that the show was never going to be the same. So like when you go see bands today, a lot of times, they're giving you a great set and a great show, but that set and show, it's usually the same every time they go to. Sometimes there's a variation, and the Dead wasn't like that, apparently. So, and you get that message when you watch this film. It was amazing to see all this come about. Basically, Phil Lesh joined the band and I guess he was like a classically trained violinist or cello. Let me get that exact info for you. at this point, I might even watch this documentary again, because there was just so much to absorb and to get from it. So he never played bass until Jerry Garcia asked him to play bass in the band. That's when he picked it up. So, and that's just like crazy, because that wasn't his background. Yeah, he was a violin player. And he also played trumpet. So he went from violin to trumpet to bass, and then became like an amazing bass player. But yeah, Jerry just asked him one day to join the band, and Phil did, and he never looked back. And he's still here. He's 78 years old. So, I mean, I thought that was interesting, that back then a simple conversation could change your life, professionally and musically. And that's what happened with him. And then Pigpen, he played the harmonica and he would sing. And when you watch, the documentary, you see that he was the guy who would start off the show and get the crowd ready for the show. You get them up and moving, get them dancing. He was the morning guy. He was the guy to get everybody pumped up, because, Jerry and Bob didn't do that. He was the guy to warm up the crowd and get them ready for the whole evening. So I think that's really cool. And like I said, it's the Warner Brothers president. He's retired now, but he definitely believed in the band. He enjoyed the band, and their first album was a psychedelic album that didn't do too well. But when they decided to do Working Men's Dead, that's the album that went platinum. That was their second album. That album was like a landmark record for them. Warner Brothers got behind the record. They promoted it. There was commercials for it, radio and TV. And that's when Warner Brothers was like, okay, we got something special here. So what a lot of people don't know is that the Grateful Dead eventually became like the most profitable touring band in the world at one point. They made more money than the Rolling Stones up until Jerry Garcia died. Then the Stones, I believe, became the highest grossing touring band. But before the death of Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead was the largest grossing touring band in the world. But if you're doing 80 shows in a year, I mean, yeah, that's a lot. So, I mean, they were always on the road. I mean, that's where they lived for the most part. So, and there's a scene in the documentary where that type of strenuous schedule started to get to Jerry Garcia, and he wound up collapsing and wound up being in a diabetic coma for a while in the hospital. And once that happened, the band was like, okay, we need to take a break. And everybody took a break. Jerry recuperated, and then he started doing the Jerry Garcia band, so he never really stopped. And then eventually that rolled back into the Grateful Dead, getting back together again, regrouping, making more music, and just moving along and moving forward. And you find out when you watch this documentary that eventually, when it gets to the part where you see the Deadheads become realized, and then the whole world starts to realize who the Grateful Dead is, because up until that point, the Grateful Dead was just this underground band that just had this movement, and everyone was happy and content with that movement. So they weren't looking to be mainstream. Jerry and the fellas had no desire for that. They weren't really a political band. They believed in free choice and free will. They accepted everybody. They were a band that was accepting of people, and that was very inclusive and welcoming of people. And sometimes that you can see that kind of worked against them in regards to what happened, like when the Hells Angels became a part of their entourage. A lot of controversy happened in regards to the incident at Altamont, where the Hells Angels were working for the Rolling Stones. So, and Jerry Garcia seemed to be someone who didn't really like to criticize other people and other movements. But the band got so big, as I said before earlier in the podcast, that eventually the shows even when the shows were sold out, people were in the parking lot, or people were trying to break in and see them for free, or they were just trying to just show up just to party. They weren't even there for the band. So then people started getting arrested. Violence was ensuing. People were getting killed. So then Phil Lesh and other members of the band would write letters to their fans, telling them that if the show is sold out, please don't come. Just stay at home and, be considerate and respectful of other people. And they really wanted Jerry to write, to sign off on the letters, and he wouldn't do it. He just didn't feel comfortable with that, telling people what to do, because he felt like, who are we to tell people what to do? Of course, he didn't want people to get hurt, but he didn't want to be Mr. Authoritarian. So, it was a fine line, a balance that the band was trying to have. I could see where Jerry Garcia was coming from, but I see where Phil Lesh and the other members were coming from too, because, it gets to be a question of safety. Something that's been great and fun and pure started to get a little distorted and a little dark, because, going to a Grateful Dead show was about fun and happiness and celebration. It wasn't supposed to be about people getting arrested, people hurting other people not even being there for the show. So it was a great show. It's a great documentary. It's very informative. And I'm going to watch it again and talk to you guys about this in a later podcast, so I can give you more detail and break it down even more, because it was a lot to take in. And I'm glad that I did. But yeah, I'm going to watch it again, because it really was that good. It's an Amazon Prime original documentary, Long Strange Trip. And all the surviving members are in it. You get to see Jerry Garcia's daughter, Trixie, talk about her father. And then you get to see that the Jerry and Bob had guys write lyrics for them. That Jerry and Bob and the band focused on the music, and they had people come in who did the lyrics for them. So kind of like the Bernie Taupin, Elton John combination. So that's cool too. And then like Robert Hunter, I believe, is the Jerry's lyricist, and a very reclusive man who didn't like to talk about the lyrics, but was always on point with what Jerry was thinking about. He knew how to write for Jerry. So that collaboration and who he was and is very fascinating. But I definitely encourage you to check out this documentary / docuseries, Long Strange Trip, about the Grateful Dead, because it really is a long, strange trip, and it's very fascinating. And I promise I will revisit that documentary and talk about this some more in more detail, because I want to break down the different sects of fans, the different division of Deadheads, and who they supported, the ones who supported Phil, the ones who supported Jerry, and how that all broke down, and just more detail about how all this happened, and how now, the Dead is no more. They were doing some shows later on called The Dead. I'm not sure if they're still touring as The Dead or not. And there is a scene where you see Bob Weir go into their archives, and there's just so much footage of like film and like music. So I'm not even sure if all of their stuff has still been released. But enough about that. Definitely check out that documentary / docuseries, Long Strange Trip, Grateful Dead, on Amazon Prime. We'll be back. We're going to speak about Love Beats and Rhymes and the season finale of Lucifer after this break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back. Once again, you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. This is your Captain Keith. We just finished talking about the new docuseries, Long Strange Trip, about the Grateful Dead off of Amazon Prime. You should check it out. It's pretty cool. Now I want to talk to you folks about Love, Beats, and Rhymes. It is a movie that was a Netflix film directed by RZA. Well, so let me not say it's a Netflix film, but I saw it on Netflix. So the production company was Cold Black Films and Lionsgate. But as I said before, Love, Beats, and Rhymes, directed by the RZA, and it stars Azelia Banks as a 25-year-old female rapper from Staten Island, New York, who wants to pursue a music career. The film also stars Lorraine Toussaint as her mother, who's also from The Orange is the New Black and Rosewood, and Jill Scott, Lucienne Laviscount, MC Jen, Hannah Mae Lee, and Common. So this film came out late last year. But it looks like it may have went straight to Netflix or video. But I definitely want to talk about this movie. I liked it. It was cool. So basically, the premise is when struggling rapper Coco Ford enrolls in a poetry class, she thinks that her rhymes will impress her teacher, Professor Dixon, who's played by Jill Scott. Instead, Dixon challenges Coco to seek real meaning in her lyrics, setting her on a journey of discovery that takes her through rap clubs and poetry slams, leading her to find her true voice and true love. So basically, Coco is in this rap group with three guys, and I think they call that like the SI crew. I forget what the name of the rap group was, and the movie starts off with battle rapping, and MC Jen is the battle rapper who's just slaying these MCs, and then you see her walk out, and they have a casket, and you see the guys come out, and you see Azelia Banks just battle rhyming MC Jen, and she basically kills it. And then you see a record executive who's there who says he enjoyed it, and they're like, well, why don't you get us a record deal? He's an A&R guy. And he's like, well, you guys are good, but it's just battle rhymes. I need more than that. And of course, the guys in Azelia's group, they disagree with him. They don't, they're not trying to hear that. They figure like battle rap is all there is, freestyling and battle rhyming is, they're trying to say that this is the essence of hip hop. It's definitely a important part of hip hop, but it's not, the only thing about hip hop. So that, it gets, so what happens basically, you find out that Coco, has been seeing, one of the guys in the rap group, named Malik, who's played by, John David Washington, who was Denzel Washington's son, actually, who's going to be in the upcoming film Black Klansman, which is a remake that will be coming out by Spike Lee. So yeah, John David Washington, who's Denzel's son, plays Malik, who's in the group, who Coco's had a thing for. They have a relationship, kind of. And of course, Coco's mother, Nichelle, who's played by Lorraine Toussaint, has her own restaurant, and she calls Coco in to come into work, and and her mom, Nichelle, doesn't really care for Malik. She thinks that Malik is basically using Coco, and that he's not good for her, and Coco doesn't really, played by Azelia Banks, doesn't really want to see that just yet. And she states that when her father died, that Malik was there for her, and that's why she has such a special attachment to him. So, but what I like about this movie is that you see this rap group with three guys and this one girl, and you see clearly that the girl is the star of this rap group. And maybe the guys see it, but they don't want to acknowledge it, especially Malik. Malik is not really open-minded to what's happening later on in Coco's life. So one day Coco comes over to the studio or to the apartment to see Malik, and the other guys in the group pretend like he's not there. But then Coco hears something, so she goes upstairs to his room, and she basically catches Malik with another girl in his bed. So that's when she realizes that he's full of crap. That's when she tells her mom afterwards, you know what, Mom, I am going to go back to school and finish getting my degree, because she's not too far away from getting her college degree in accounting. So first of all, it's cool to see a hip-hop movie about this MC who actually is going to college and is that close to getting her degree, because you don't always get that perception of rappers, coming from a collegiate background or even talking about or acknowledging college. So that was cool to see. So she goes to school, and she runs into her girlfriend, Julie, who's played by Hannah Mae Lee. And she's like, yeah, I'm in college too. And she's like, I'm about to take this easy poetry course. It should be easy. So of course, because Coco is this MC, she thinks, oh, wow, I'll take this poetry course. It'll be a slam. She gets there, and Jill Scott is Professor Dixon. And Azelia is sitting in the front row with her girlfriend, Julie. And this English cat comes up to her, and he's like, I believe you're in my seat. I have my backpack there. And Coco's, is just kind of rude to him. And this guy's played by Lucien Laviscount. He plays Derek. And she's like, this seat's taken, and she just really kind of snooty and kind of, rude to him. So he doesn't say anything, and he sits down. And then when Professor Dixon, played by Jill Scott, speaks, she talks about how this is poetry and how, you have to live poetry. It's not just enough to read poetry. And she says that, this her teaching assistant is Derek. So the guy that Coco basically dissed about his seat is the teaching assistant who's going to go over the curriculum and teach the class. So at that point, she sees that she kind of messed up a little bit, but nothing she can do about it. So then, Professor Dixon asked all the students in the class that day to recite any poetry that they know of. So Coco decides to recite a verse from Rakim, from Eric B. and Rakim off of Paid in Full. And of course, Professor Dixon and Derek recognized the rhyme, and they're like, that's rap, that's not poetry. There's a difference. So where that heads. So Coco's like, well, no, I disagree. Rap is poetry. She's like, oh, no, it's not. And you might be in the wrong class. So at that point, once the class is over, Coco leaves and she's thinking about dropping the class. Then there's a post on Twitter, from Derek or from Professor Dixon. And it's kind of taking a swipe about how hip hop is not poetry. So then Coco takes a swipe back at the professor in regards to saying that it is, and that those who can't wind up teaching poetry. So once Professor Dixon sees that tweet, she's like, you know what, let her in the class. So basically it's on, they're going to challenge each other. So Professor Dixon wants to see if Coco can last and if she can elevate herself and see the difference between poetry and hip hop. So later on throughout the movie, they talk, Professor Dixon and Derek talk about sonnets and rhyme schemes and iambic pentameters. So, and then it's like when you think about the English language and you think about poetry and prose and rhyming, it's just really interesting to see how all these things are connected to each other. I'm just waiting for somebody one day to take someone's rap and just put it on the chalkboard and just break down the adjectives and nouns and the verbs to it and talk about the rhyme scheme pattern and to see if it's similar to sonnets. Because that's a whole new way of getting young people into the English, into English as a subject matter, because it's words and communication, and there's just always so much that you can do with that. So basically what happens is they have a field trip and they have to go to a slam poetry event, and that's where you meet Common, who winds up being Professor Dixon's husband. He played by Common's name is Whole Train, and he winds up asking. So when Derek introduces her, you find out that Coltrane is having a slam poetry contest to get the four or five people who will eventually be the finalists and win the slam poetry, contest. They'll win it, and they'll get. So it's a big to do, and Derek wants to be a part of it. So Coltrane convinces Coco to be one of the judges. So she judges, and then Derek winds up performing some of his slam poetry. But one of the things he does that he shouldn't do is he uses his cell phone a little bit while he's reciting his poetry. So if you're going to do slam poetry, you need to be able to recite it verbatim, by heart, not looking down at a phone or a notepad. And you hear Coco tell Julie that she liked his poem, but she didn't like his delivery. So when the judging comes, he gets a low ranking of like a 6.5. So he was mad. And then Coltrane, played by Common, tells Coco that, wow, I thought you'd be a good judge, and you're kind of harsh. His students never rank him that low. But at the same time, I'm glad that she did. So she shouldn't be afraid to rank him low because he's her teacher. So she actually did the right thing in that regard. We'll talk some more about Love, Beats, and Rhymes after this break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And once again, you're listening to Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. This is your Captain Keith. We're talking about the movie Love, Beats, and Rhymes, starring Azelia Banks, directed by RZA. Also co-stars Jill Scott and Common, and John David Washington, and say his name again, Lucien Laviscount. Well, that's a lot to say. So, as I said before, so Coco gives Derek, a bad rating for his performance. And from that point on, he gets a little bit upset with her. He doesn't really want to talk to her. And then she approaches him. She's like, well, I'm trying. She keeps on doing rapping and not doing poetry. And, he's trying to get her to try some spoken word and try to talk about something that's different than what she usually talks about. So, and Coco also was able to convince the A&R rep to give them a shot for a demo. She had to smooth things over because the fellas in her group were real rude to him. And when he walked off, she went after him earlier in the film and just sorry about the fellas, but what do we have to do? So she's going to school and trying to create a demo with her rap group to get them noticed and to do something special. So what the fellas don't know is that her going to school is going to change her perspective on hip hop and rhyming and writing and music in general, writing lyrics. So, and there's one of the guys in the group who's the engineer. He's open to what Coco does, but Malik and the other cat in the group are not. So basically, eventually Derek is able to, teach Coco how to look more inward and to do more self-reflection about what she sees. There's a scene where they're looking at I guess the Staten Island Bridge, and he asks her what she sees, and she tells him, and then he tells her what he sees, and it's a totally different perspective. And basically he tells her, just be still and just feel it, just what do you feel? What do you see? There's more than one perspective. There's more than one way of looking at things. So try to be more open to that. And she starts doing that. And, she starts observing other people and what they see and maybe their pain. And some of their pain. And she starts to write that. And then when she starts to speak on that in class, eventually Professor Dixon starts to, she starts to wear her down. And she starts to become one of the better pupils in the poetry class because, she's starting to see there is a difference, like with spoken word versus, hip hop and rhyming. But whether or not that means that hip hop is not poetry, well, we'll talk about that. So, of course, as you already know, you can tell it's coming. Derek and Coco start to get close. They date, and one thing leads to another. They have a night together, and eventually, the next time she sees Derek after talking to Julie about what happened, she's kind of excited, and Derek is freaking out. It's like, let's just pretend this didn't happen. And then, of course, she's upset, but she plays along and she just walks away. And then Derek realizes he made a mistake and he shouldn't have done that to her. And basically what happens is that he tells her, hey, I'm sorry, I do want a relationship with you. And of course she beams and smiles about that because she's never dated a guy like him. And basically she gets a call from her mom to come into the restaurant to do some work. She comes, and Derek tags along. He starts helping out in the restaurant. So of course the mom likes him. And Coco winds up recording a song. It's a spoken word song that her producer puts music to, and they both like it a lot. But of course, Malik doesn't like it. He thinks it's the wrong direction. He thinks the group shouldn't go in that direction. They get into an argument, and she tells Malik that she's tired of having to deal with his crime drama fantasies and gangster rap fantasies. And Malik tells her, well, why don't you just quit the group? And she's like, okay, then I will. So she leaves the group, and she's done with it because it's just frustrating for her. And then, basically she's going to tell Derek what's happening. And then you find out that Derek has been having an affair with Professor Dixon, and Coco catches them. And it just gets all bad from there for a moment. And it's just a really interesting story to see where it goes from there. But it's a really good movie about hip hop, poetry, and the connection that it has, and finding out that rap is poetry, and that these early poets who've written books are rappers themselves, really. I mean, that's the conclusion that you come to when you see this film. It's a good film, and I really enjoyed it. The only downside is that there wasn't a soundtrack released to the film to give it more promotion. And for those of you who may know Azelia Banks is a very outspoken rapper who's not one to mince words about what she thinks of her contemporaries. And in the rap game, she does not hold her tongue, and she can rhyme. She's great. And sometimes her music has this hip hop house feel to it, dance feel to it. She's really good. So, I definitely want to encourage her to do more films. It was a nice film. I enjoyed it. I like the cast. I like the message. I like where it went. And it was nice to see a movie about a girl who rhymes and her ascension and her growth as an MC and an artist and as a person. Love Beats and Rhymes. It was a good film. I definitely recommend it. You can watch it on Netflix. So Azelia Banks, Jill Scott Common, and like I said, and John David Washington, Denzel's son. He's on the come up. So, and you don't really recognize him when you watch him in the movie. So the role he's playing in this film to who he is and what he is in the new Black Klansman that's coming out. It's like night and day. So, and I suspect that film is going to be a breakout role for him. So only time will tell, but definitely check that film out. It's worth checking out. It's really cool. Like I said, the only drawback is that there should have been a soundtrack to it. And I mean, there's music in the film, so it's just a question of releasing it. And maybe RZA will do that. I definitely think he should. But he did a great job directing the film. I really enjoyed it. It was cool. Very cool. So look forward to seeing Miss Banks do more films. So, and of course, the Man with the Iron Fist that RZA did, I enjoyed that film as well. So that was cool when he directed that. So And moving right along, season 3 of Lucifer. So the season finale of Lucifer had Lucifer Morningstar have a confrontation with Cain, played by Tom Welling, where Cain had accidentally killed Trisha Helfer's character, who was once inhabited by Lucifer's mom, the mother of all creation. She had a relationship with Dan, who is Chloe Decker's ex-husband and the father of her child, Trixie. So basically, the final confrontation, Lucifer and Cain have it out because Cain was trying to kill Amenadiel, because Cain had this mark on his arm that kept him immortal. And once he fell in love with Chloe, the mark was finally gone. And at that point, the irony was, all this time Cain had been wanting to die because he had lived for so long, being basically the world's oldest human. But once he fell in love with Chloe, he wanted to live. But then Chloe let him know that, hey, I care for you, but I don't love you. I can't marry you. So now, all of a sudden, Cain doesn't want to die. So he's trying to figure out what he can do to bring that mark back. So he figures if he kills God's favorite son, Amenadiel, that'll do the trick. So Amenadiel was sitting with Trisha Helfer's character. And give me 1 second. I need to tell you what her name was. I watch that show all the time, and the names just, oh man, have a brain freeze. I hate that. One moment. I'll give you that information. Charlotte. Yes. So she played Charlotte on the show. So Amenadiel's sitting next to Charlotte. Cain takes a, shot at Amenadiel through the bushes. Charlotte sees the gun, steps in front of Amenadiel, saves his life. She dies. And basically, Charlotte, up until that happened, was worried that she wasn't going to get into heaven, because as a lawyer as a defense lawyer, she represented a lot of low-life criminals who were murderers, and she got them off. And she just wasn't a real nice person. But when she started working for the prosecution, she started to change her life around. And Charlotte had come to the conclusion that, hey, if I go back to hell, that's fine, whatever. But Charlotte helped Amenadiel solve a murder, and they felt really happy about that. So when Cain tries to shoot Amenadiel, and she steps in front of the bullet, and she takes it, saving Amenadiel's life, and dies, Amenadiel at that point hadn't had his wings in a while. He lost his wings, and he felt broken, tried to figure out what he was supposed to do to please his father, God, so he can get back to having his wings and having his power. Amenadiel's power was he's able to stop time. That's the power that he has as an angel. So when Charlotte dies saving his life, and she did it just because she cared about him, Amenadiel gets his wings back all of a sudden, and he starts crying, and he looks up at the sky, and he says, "Let me take you home." And he flies back to heaven. So we don't know if Amenadiel comes back or not, but at that moment in time, he got his wings back, and the feather from his wing falls on the ground. Chloe Decker gets the phone call. Lucifer shows up with her, and they see that Charlotte is dead. And of course, like I said, Kevin Alejandro, who plays Dan, who's a police officer as well, Chloe's ex-husband, he's devastated because he got back with Charlotte, professed his love for her, and they were a couple, and they were happy. So it was it was sad news, because at this point, Charlotte had become a part of their little crime-fighting family. And of course, she looks like Lucifer's mom because she took on that body. So Lucifer's upset too. And they have to figure out who did this. Hence the confrontation later on. Dan figures out that Marcus Pierce, played by, who's Cain, played by Tom Welling from Smallville, was the Sinner Man, who was a character within the show who was doing bad things and killing people. And they have to get proof. Lucifer finally gets proof. And he winds up killing Cain. But before he kills Cain, he's like, well, Amenadiel had this belief that maybe we were punishing ourselves and maybe it wasn't God doing it, that it was us, that we weren't feeling worthy of who we were, hence losing my wings, hence not having my devil face, and then Lucifer getting his angel wings back. So, Cain, played by Marcus Pierce, played by Tom Welling, states, well, hey man, I'm not going to hell because I don't have anything to be guilty about. And Lucifer's like, wait a minute. Yes, you do. You killed Charlotte when you were trying to kill Amenadiel. So I know you feel guilty about that. And when you go to heaven, you'll get to relive that nightmare. I mean, when you go to hell, you'll get to relive that nightmare over and over and over again. And, Cain is just like, well, that's fine. But in regards to your theory, your true face is showing. He says something to that effect, and he watched Cain die, and as he stands up and turns around and Chloe comes into the room, she sees Lucifer's true face, and he's talking to her, and she's like, oh my God, it's true, and she starts shaking because all this time he's always been telling her the truth about who he is, and she doesn't believe him. But now the season finale, she sees his face, and she's shaking because now she realizes that he is the son of, he is Satan, and he's an angel. He's the devil himself. So, I mean, how do you take all that when you realize that you've been working side by side with Satan? How do you swallow that pill? So, that was the finale. Then there were rumors that the show got canceled, and then they showed 2 bonus episodes that they weren't necessarily going to show. And then now everyone's on the ropes. We don't know if we're going to get Lucifer season 4, but apparently their fans have been campaigning, hitting Twitter and social media, requesting to save the show. So Fox might renew it for season 4. I think they did. It's a great show. I think they should. It's a great show. And it's getting even more interesting now that Chloe, and before she saw his face, they actually had a passionate kiss embrace. So I think you should keep this show and do a season 4 because, where do you go from here? That's the fascinating key. Now that you know that you're in love with Satan, and I mean that in the nicest way, however that could be, in this context of the TV show, which is based off a comic book. So let's remember that too, folks. Where do you go from here with that show? I mean, that's the intriguing, fascinating part. Now, how do you live your life? How do you can't unsee what you saw? And will you reject him or will you embrace him now that you know who he really is? Because it took a while for the psychiatrist to, played by Linda, played by Rachel Harris, played Linda Martin, to, deal with it and accept him for who he was. Because it took her a while because she freaked out. I mean, of course, what human wouldn't freak out knowing that the guy who calls himself Satan and Lucifer is not a crackpot and is the real thing. That's going to throw anybody for a loop. But so now we don't know if they're going to get renewed for season 4. That's up in the wind. If you like the show, like I do, definitely hit social media to request, hey, one more season at least. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, the good people of planet Earth and the known universe. I appreciate all of you. I had a good time. Hope you did. And we'll see you somewhere out in space.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.